Coming up, we finish our DTVC Extra look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1 with Captain America and the Avengers. Then next week, we've got Todd Liebenow from Forgotten Filmcast. He's going to be on. We're going to be talking about Welcome to Willits, the film that has a small Dolph role in it. I guess it's like he's he's in it for a little bit. But so I will be doing it next week. In 2 weeks, we've got Mitch from the Video Vacuum on. We'll be looking at Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance. So kind of a little bit of a dovetail with what we've been talking about here with comic book movies. And then after that, in 3 weeks, we've got Will from Exploding Helicopter on. We're going to be looking at 2 films from Vinnie Jones. We'll be looking at Bulletproof and The Big Ugly. And then we're going to wrap up the month with Ty from Comeuppance. We'll be looking at Assassin, the last Bruce Willis film, at least the last one listed on IMDb. And then The System, a film that has Tyrese and also Jeremy Piven, so that should be an interesting one. So that's what we've got coming up here on the podcast. And then you'll notice with the blog, I hadn't posted anything this weekend, so I was supposed to do Hunting Games. Also was thinking about maybe doing Craving, the Jay Horton film. I ended up catching COVID last week, or testing positive for COVID. So I was out of commission for a good chunk of the week. I did record 2 podcasts in that time, so that is something. And I'm still kind of, I'm better now, much better now, but I still have a little bit of a lingering cough. That's really kind of the thing. But otherwise, I'm kind of better. So I'm going to hopefully start posting reviews again, getting back into that, but we'll see. So I don't know what the next blog post is going to be. If I'm going to go into Commando with Michael Jai White and just leave Hunting Games off for the time being. And actually, the problem was, it ended up not even being Hunting Games because Hunting Games was removed from Tubi. So I had to pick something else, and I was going to do The Weapon, the Tony Sheena film, because that is still on Tubi, and I'd gotten all the images for it, was ready to write the post, and I started, I just didn't feel up to it. I just I couldn't get myself to do it. So we'll see what happens. And we'll see what happens with the blog in the coming weeks. If I'm just gonna skip The Weapon and go right into Commando, because I'll have to watch that one, or if I'm going to I'm going to get The Weapon in at some point, maybe even this week. And also Craving. I still want to try to get Craving in. I watched that one as well. It was a really solid movie. So I'd like to get that review up for Jay Horton as well. I know he's got another Indiegogo at the moment. So, kind of maybe help get the word out on that. So, yeah, everything's a bit up in the air with me missing a week like that, but hopefully we'll kind of get it all back on track. And that also goes for the other things, like with the archive. I did do a couple more months in the archive, but again, fell behind on that. Really interesting, I'd say, getting COVID. I caught it. I know pretty much probably where I got it. I was at the Joel Embiid's 70-point game that he had, and I wasn't wearing a mask, and just ended up with it. But it felt like a really, really bad cold, but it also had this feeling of like, oh, I'm in bed, relaxing. I can kind of just do whatever, and then you get on the computer and start typing. It's like, oh, I need to put this thing down. I did watch some movies, did do that kind of stuff. But yeah, it kind of puts the blog behind a little bit, and you kind of see too with the timeline that I've sort of set up for things that it's sort of like, okay, everything's got to hit at the right point. At the very least, we did get I was able to do the podcast. I think it was a little bit easier to sit at the computer and record and speak than it was to like type and be more active in that sense. And also with me doing podcasts now where I've got a guest, right, I can let the guest speak a lot more, and that gives me a little bit of a break as well. So that's why I was able to get the podcast in, but really, really nothing else. So hopefully we'll get things caught back up. I think that's kind of everything. Usually I have a lot more in this opening segment here, and I don't, again, because, we were out of commission for a bit. I mean, in terms of the blog, again, I don't know what that means, but I mean, again, the plan is for the month of February, Commando, Michael Jai White film, looking to get some Fred Williamson in, that Mike Coulter film that's on Tubi, hoping to get that one in, Ice-T film as well. So those are all planned for the upcoming Saturday/Sundays here in February. So we'll see what happens there. All right, so why don't we take a break here? We'll have our theme song here. We'll have John from After Movie Diner playing our theme song, and then it's time to start talking about Captain America, the First Avenger. All right, so let's jump in here on Captain America: First Avenger. So, of course, the thing with Captain America is kind of like the first big star for Marvel. It was Timely Comics, it was invented by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby in 1940. So this would have been pre-Pearl Harbor, so it's a time when there's still sort of that non-interventionist movement in America where people were saying we shouldn't get involved in the war, and Captain America is kind of an answer to that, right? That he is he's someone who does get involved, right? He's beating up Hitler in the first issue. He's the first comic book character that Timely, which again becomes Marvel, creates that has his own book right away. So for the most part, you'd have these sort of ensemble books that would introduce characters that way. He was his own character right away, and it sold out right away. So naturally, with him being the first big character, he's also the first one that's adapted for the screen. And at that time, comic book characters were adapted in serials. So he was adapted in the Captain America serial by Republic Pictures. Interesting about that one, I did watch it. It's on YouTube, all 15 parts. Really, really interesting. So instead of Steve Rogers, it's Grant Gardner. It is he's like a district attorney. No superhumans or no super soldier serum. No shield as well. It just has a gun. It's kind of worth watching. One of the things I think the costume that they used for it was the inspiration for the costume that the movie that we're going to be talking about uses kind of in the early incarnation of Captain America when he's going on the world tour, like trying to get people to buy war bonds. It's very much like a serial in the sense of like, if you think of like what Batman was making fun of, there's definitely some terms, there's some items in the film that will get you to laugh. They talk about a vibrator, this sort of like a large vibrator device that can like, I guess, cause a building to fall over. But I have to feel like, I don't know. We're at a time now where that word vibrator means something very specific, and it's hard for it to not mean anything else in our brains. And so when you hear an evil scientist talking about getting his hands on the vibrator, it can't not be funny. I will say from an action standpoint, there's a lot of fight scenes where they're just, it's really just Captain America just going around punching guys with fedoras or with hats on, played by Italian American and Irish actors, and he's just beating the crap out of them. They're throwing him around too, and then eventually he's throwing them out of a window or something like that, or shooting them. Somebody likened it to like the Punisher. There is a little bit of Punisher in there. I would say that he just drives around. He drives around in a car too. Like at one point he has a motorcycle. For the most part, he's driving around in a car. He has no shield. He has a gun instead. But the character Grant Gardner, he's just like everyone's when he's ready to be Captain America, he just takes off his wool suit and his shirt and everything, and he's got the Captain America suit underneath it. So there's that element there. Obviously, the bondage is heavy. His main woman that supports him, Lorna Gray is the actress's name, but Gail Richards is the character name. She's just constantly being captured by the baddies and getting tied up. Of course, but everybody else does too. Guys are not exempt from it either. So everybody's getting it. But the other thing too is like she can do stuff like fly a plane. One scene she's flying a plane and she actually has to bail out, which was really cool. Also, this is very much like what we think of as false advertising of bait and switches. This movie employs, or the serial employs bait and switches in like the most egregious way. It's essentially, it's like, oh, Captain America's stuck in this building and it just blew up. Okay, find out what happened next week. And it's like, oh wait, did we forget to tell you that he walked out of the building before it blew up? Yeah, that's but at least you're seeing it now. He walked out of the building, then it blew up. Sorry, we forgot to mention that fact that he walked out. Because you're like, well, how does he get out of this one? And it's like, oh, or like when Gail Richards is flying the plane, she's sort of flying around, and there's a bomb on the plane, and she doesn't know about it. And it's like, one moment she's just flying around, and the next moment the plane blows up, right? It's like, oh, find out what happens next week. And it's like, Oh, we forgot to mention that he radios ahead to her, and she bails out and has a parachute on her, and she just, she's perfectly fine. So so definitely big on the false advertising, and I guess those things were considered completely fine back then. Just like we look at now, where it's like you see Bruce Willis splashed all across the cover of a movie and he's barely in it. All false advertising, I guess, has been in movies, in the movie industry for a long time. So we haven't really cornered the market on it. We just got guys like Randall Emmett who have taken it to a new level. So that was the first sort of live action adaptation. That was Captain America. And then, of course, what happens is that after the war, there's sort of a lack of interest, one, in comic books in general, and two, in sort of the war piece. The Korean War is going on at that time, and nobody was really as much in favor of that war, or there wasn't the rah-rah sentiment around it. And so he kind of fades out. And then in the 60s, they bring him back because they kind of see like there's a market for him. And he comes back. He's sort of found in the Avengers. And once he's found in the Avengers, that's it. He's there for the rest of, he's kind of existed essentially through that whole time. So in terms of who are Marvel's biggest characters, Captain America is definitely up there, right? I think, again, Spider-Man, X-Men, probably the two biggest ones. And then I think, we were talking about maybe Hulk being up there. I think Captain America is, at the very least, looking at who the Marvel Cinematic Universe was adapting, Captain America was going to be their biggest swing, right? So they had to really get it right with Iron Man because that was their very first film. Now this is like another road marker or mile marker that they needed to really get right. Looking at the previous other adaptations, right? Of course, you had the two TV movies that Reb Brown did. Those ones. Reb Brown is probably the most Captain America-ish, right? Like he just exudes Captain America. That one is a little bit interesting because Steve, he's not frozen, right? And comes, woken up after being frozen, and I think there is a bit of Captain America needing to be a man lost in time somehow that wasn't in those ones that, say what you want. I really liked Reb Brown as Captain America, but I do think that's an element of Captain America's character. Now, granted, right, the Captain America that's frozen in the Avengers, that Captain America hasn't only been frozen for 20 years at that point, right? It's not like it's that long. I think what they did is, using the term the kids use nowadays, retconning, right? They retconned when they took him out of the, they unthawed him in that storyline in the 60s. They essentially removed the 50s incarnations of him and just made it out that he was frozen after World War II. And so even then, it still is only 15 or 20 years that he's frozen, but a lot had changed in the world at that time. If you watch Mad Men's probably the best example of it. When you just see the first few years of that show, how much changes in the 60s. When you get Don Draper, who's building his kid's fort or whatever, and he's got his long sleeve shirt on that's rolled up, and he's going to the fridge in his garage to open up cans of beers with a little pop, a can opener thing to kind of, because we didn't have pop tops by that point. It is amazing a lot of the different changes that happen musically, all those kinds of things. And so you could kind of put him in that and be like, oh, you were frozen in 44, now you're waking up and you're seeing a completely different world, right? Even in the 60s, the fact that you'd be, that Germany and Japan would be considered safe places for us to go, and that you could watch movies and things like that from them, and consume their products, right? That would have been enough of a huge thing for him. But so that's a huge element, I think, of Captain America that I think you have to sort of have in there. And again, that the two Reb Brown TV movies don't have. Now they do bring it back with the Albert Pyun film. The thing with the Albert Pyun film, of course, is that they had an ever shrinking budget. And so that made it difficult to make the movie the way they wanted. There's some other elements as well. Albert Pyun didn't want to use the big blue rubber suit, but excuse me, Marvel insisted on that. They insisted that they keep using that because it was iconic. And so at the time, I guess he had more of a black suit that he was using. And I'm trying to remember at that time. I guess I kind of remember at that time that suit, the darker suit. and he wanted to employ that, but he wasn't allowed to. Of course, the film didn't make it into the theaters in the U.S. until, it did screen outside the U.S., but I remember it advertised to screen I think in small showings. I remember getting like some comic book news. They weren't like magazines, but they were kind of newspaper type things. So it wasn't Wizard, but it was like similar kinds of things where you kind of read about the comic book industry, and they would have ads for screenings in LA that, of course, I wasn't going to be able to go to. And of course, I've reviewed that Albert Pyun flick just because I've reviewed all of Pyun's stuff. I believe in 2011, when this film that we're going to talk about comes out, I think he was out trying to screen his director's cut of Captain America, because he did have a director's cut of it, because he kind of felt like the film was taken from him. He wanted to do more of a human interest version of it, and the film. The people wanted it to be more action-oriented, and that's where we kind of get this sort of splitting the difference. It doesn't work in either direction. Pyun does definitely lean into the man out of time element. Of course, at this stage, right, it's another 30 years or 25 years or so, right, that he's out of time at this point, which, again, is still kind of crazy to think, right, that in 1990, you're 50 years, right, removed from when he was frozen. Maybe not even quite that long, but kind of that idea, right? That now we're talking about 70. Now we're talking about 80 years, right? That we're going to keep pushing this time forward, and that just keeps making this sort of the man at a time element that much bigger, right? That you've got this much bigger difference that you're working with there. But anyway, so we get that adaptation, and then it's interesting, right? Because then we get the big comic book boom of the 2000s. Where Marvel really, really jumps into the comic book world, right? I mean, as we've talked about on here before, that before this point, Marvel had, they had in 1986 they had Howard the Duck, and then they don't have another live action big screen film until Blade in '98. But once Blade comes, you get X-Men in 2000, and it really just starts to open up. And really, kind of all of the big heavy hitters get movies except for Captain America. You see, we've got Blade 2. We got Spider-Man. You got Daredevil. You got Hulk. The Punisher gets a movie. Fantastic Four get their movie. Ghost Rider gets one, right? And so all the other big names had gotten one at this point, and it really was just. Now, granted, I should say, I think what we do know is that there were attempts to make this movie before that, right? That I guess there was a lawsuit around the attempt to make a movie in sort of like late 90s, early 2000s. And so in 2005, I guess they were looking at making the film then, and, once they... I don't know exactly what the story was. It's sometimes with Wikipedia, it's interesting. You kind of read through, and it'll be like these muddled kinds of things. But yeah, they were going to use, I think it was Artisan Entertainment, which Artisan did the Punisher movie. So Artisan was going to make that movie, but again, there was lawsuits surrounding it, and then finally, I think Marvel got a loan from Merrill Lynch to make the movie with Paramount, which this is one of the last Paramount distributed ones, because again, if you remember, Disney bought Marvel, right? They bought the rights to these movies, but they kind of honored the existing distribution contracts that Marvel had signed. Marvel Studios had signed with Paramount. So this is still listed as a Paramount movie, even though it's a Marvel one. If you go to Disney Plus, you can find it there. So yeah, so we're at the stage now, right, where we've had 4 movies already in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we've got the Iron Man movie, right, which again is the one that really hits it out of the park. It's just really, really, really a great film. And we kind of bring the Hulk back, right? The Hulk is the first big name one, right, that they kind of do a film of, and they're trying to essentially sort of remake the 03 one that wasn't well received, the Ang Lee one. It's successful enough. And then you've got the second Iron Man film, which I think was important, even though the fact that this is the only phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe where you have a sequel within it, unless you count Infinity War and Endgame. I kind of look at those as 2 parts of one whole. So the Iron Man sequel, I think it was important to sort of keep that momentum going from Iron Man being sort of the anchor character. And what's interesting, right, is that when you inject Captain America into this, because now, we've gotten Thor. Thor was successful as well. Captain America is the biggest one of them, right? And so now you've already hinged everything on Iron Man being, you've developed him as the biggest one. So now when you bring Captain America into it, right, it's interesting because he's automatically, if you get this right, which they do get it right, he's going to suddenly be the biggest one, right? He's going to suddenly be the leader because that's who Captain America was, right? That's the character Captain America is. As a kid growing up, that's the thing I always remember about Captain America, is that Captain America was the adult in the room. He was the leader. He was the one that everybody came in behind. He was maybe not the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. He didn't have magical powers, but he got things done and he led. And so if this works, right, when you get into the Avengers movie, it's either going to create the friction between Robert Downey Jr. and Captain America and Chris Evans, or it's he's just going to fall in line. Everybody's going to fall in line behind him and just let him lead. So there's that piece there. There's another element of Captain America's story that I think this film, it had a lot of options with ways it could go, and it chose an option that I thought was a really, really great one. The idea was that, again, you've got this man out of time element with Captain America. And a lot of times what happens is that what happens in the 40s is like prologue. And then you kind of come back to the future. Like, think about the Albert Pyun film, right? Where there's incidents that happen in the World War II period, but then, he's existing as the man at a time in the 90s. You've got Ronnie Cox as the president who remembers him as a boy, being frozen in ice and all of that stuff. So, so this movie decides, instead of having it be the man out of time as the whole story, they decide, why don't we do a story based on the World War II period and have it be do his origin story and do it all there in that period. So with that one, with sirens blaring in the background, why don't I give a quick synopsis? So Chris Evans, he plays Steve Rogers, who's this young man who's trying to join the war effort, right? And he cannot get himself drafted because he's 4F. He's small. They've used computer generated software to make him look smaller than he is. And his buddy Bucky gets drafted, but he can't seem to make it. After trying for a fifth time and it being failing, and he's of course lying on his application papers because he's been turned down the first time, so he's trying with these new terms. Stanley Tucci, who is Dr. Erskine, the man who's invented the super soldier serum, sees some potential in him and says, "Hey, you know what? If you really want to serve, come. I think we have a place for you." So he goes to basic training where Haley Atwell, who is Peggy Carter, she's there, also part of this experimental unit, or this whatever it is that they're doing here. And Tommy Lee Jones, of course, is the colonel who's kind of helping to train these guys. And Haley Atwell, of course, sees something in Steve Rogers, while Tommy Lee Jones thinks he's too scrawny and he's not going to work. And then after a few different trials, they realize, no, he's the guy for it. So they take him to Brooklyn, where they have this secret underground chamber, which is really interesting with the underground chamber because Haley Atwell, Peggy Carter, she's taking Steve Rogers there, and it's like in this antique shop where the woman says, "Hey, nice weather," and they go, she says something along the lines of "Yes, but I still take my umbrella," as if that's the code word that lets them in. And when you get inside, there's all of these people in there. It's does every single person have to give the code word to be able to get through and go to the other side? Or is there another entrance somewhere that you can take that doesn't involve all of that? So I guess that's probably part of the reason why they had to invent the key card. So you could think about my job. I work from home, but if I had to go to the office and the key card, it obviates the password approach, right? Because if everybody had to do the password, it would take forever. So anyway. They inject him with the super serum. We also see that Tony Stark's dad, Henry Stark, is there helping out with this. And also Hydra. Hugo Weaving is playing the Red Skull. He's got Hydra agents everywhere. And when he finds out that Erskine is around, he's kind of puts out a hit on him because Erskine gave the super soldier serum to Hugo Weaving first to the Red Skull, and that's what turned him into the Red Skull. So he wants a better version of it, or maybe he wants nobody to have it because he knows if a whole series of soldiers can get it, they could potentially defeat him. So Steve Rogers becomes Captain America, and at the same time, there's the assassination attempt on Erskine, and actually the attempt is successful. You get a foot chase, the last vial is broken, so that's it. We only have one super soldier, and that's it. It's Captain America. Instead of being put on the front lines, he is sent by a senator to go around and kind of collect war bonds. And he's very successful at it. War bonds go about 10% every place he goes. When he goes out to the front lines to try to do like a USO tour kind of thing, it doesn't go over well, right? Because I think people were like, hey, I'm not actually out here getting shot. I don't need to see Captain America in this cutesy outfit. And then when he finds out that Bucky's unit has been captured by Hydra, he, against orders, goes out to try to save them, and he does save them. And once he's saved them and he's saved some of these guys in this unit, Tommy Lee Jones gives him the go-ahead to use some of these guys to create his own unit to go and like hit all the Hydra spots, which they do. They start hitting all the Hydra spots, and they kind of are able to defeat Hydra. But there's sort of this last gasp where the plane that Hydra is trying to escape in, and Hugo Weaving's trying to escape in. If Captain America can defeat him and go back home, he realizes that he's going to have to fly the plane into the Arctic in order to save people's lives because there are nuclear bombs on it, or there are bombs targeting big cities. And that's it. He crashes the plane and he's frozen. And then he wakes up and he's listening to a Brooklyn Dodgers game that he knows is from before the time that he went under. And that's when they explain to him, like, yeah, it's 70 years in the future. And so, you got to kind of figure that out. Oh, I will say, this is one of my favorite comic book movies. I remember when it came out, I was on Tumblr at the time. I'd kind of just started on Tumblr, and Tumblr was abuzz about this thing. They loved Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter. They loved all of the imagery, the shots, all of that kind of stuff. And it was everywhere. And I was like, okay, I've got to see this one. And so this was one of the only ones that I really went out of my way to watch until I started doing this recent thing here. But as a period piece, it works so well. They hit all those spots so well. And Chris Evans really, really plays the part well as well. And then, using the technology in ways that I never would have expected. Like, I wouldn't have thought about the idea of using the technology to make him into this like this kind of scrawny weakling kind of character. So that then when he gets the serum and he's kind of buff and all that, that there's that transformation piece there. I never even considered the idea of doing that. That just was such a really great idea. Again, it was a use of technology that I didn't even think of existing, and it was perfect. But they go to like a World's Fair kind of thing, and it's like Henry Stark is showing off some technology or something, but just the imagery, the way all of that looked was so fantastic. 1940s Brooklyn was really nice. Hugo Weaving's his lair, Red Skull's lair was really, really great. Even the casting as well. I think Chris Evans as Captain America was really great too. So, I think all of that really worked. And it's like, okay, we're at a point now where we're getting to the end of Avengers, right? We've had 5 movies. And to have 5 movies in a row have, Captain America and Iron Man really hit it out of the park, right? And then, Iron Man 2 being really solid as well. And then, Incredible Hulk and Thor being good, right? And I think to some extent maybe Thor was better than Hulk, but just to have it be good, right? I was trying to think when any kind of series had a 5-movie run where you didn't have a dud in there somewhere. But the thing was this one didn't have the luxury of being Thor or Incredible Hulk, right? It needed to be better. It needed to be on the level of the first Iron Man movie in order for the whole thing to work. And it did. I have to say, and of course, again, this is one that I've liked for a long time. This is one that's up there as one of my favorite comic book movies. So I've always really enjoyed this one. I think it had to also be really good to win me over when there was the Albert Pyun one out there, when there were the Reb Brown ones out there. And I don't think it necessarily felt like it needed to be good to outdo those. I think it didn't feel like it was competing with those. But by the same token, the fact that we hadn't gotten a Captain America at all in this, early 2000s period where, we got Daredevil, we got, the really great Spider-Man, but the movies that we were getting at that time, at this point, we've almost had 2 Ghost Riders before we had 1 Captain America, right? Because the second Ghost Rider comes out after this one. But the fact that it took this long for them to even do Captain America, again, we talked about the fact that he was the first big, live action adaptation. He was also, when you think about it from a movie standpoint, right? He was kind of the first movie in the sense that he was the first feature length movie because, right, the other ones were TV shows, right? Hulk and Spider-Man were TV shows, and even though they were TV movies, right, they were still movies in that sense. So he was the one, right? He's usually the trailblazer, and the fact that they waited this long and they got him in here, I think. But again, it worked. It worked, and it kind of set us up for what we've got coming here in the future, which I think is really fantastic. Now, I kind of want to wrap on this one. I was trying to think of other pieces of the movie that I really liked. I like the Red Skull as a baddie. We think of Captain America, he doesn't quite have the villains gallery that you get from some of the other ones out there, but I definitely liked the use of him. I think the outfits that they had for Captain America were great. Again, like I said, I think that original outfit that he's using, the boots are a little different from what the Captain America in the serial was wearing, but everything else in that outfit looks very similar. If you ever watch, go on YouTube and you watch those old those serials, you'll see that the outfit is very similar to the one that Captain America wears, that Chris Evans wears when he's out selling war bonds. But I think there's also this sense. It's when he gets his shield, right? When he gets those elements there, the film is very reverent to those elements and really hits them out of the park. And I guess it's just the fact that they were getting it all right at this stage. It's so rare, right? It just doesn't happen. And so, yeah, and I will say Captain America is one that's always kind of had a place, especially place in my heart as well. I've always liked Captain America. I think because he's always so earnest, it plays kind of both ways, where it's it can be a little bit goofy, but can also be a lot of fun and somebody that you have to root for. So that's one piece that I've always liked about Captain America. I think in terms of my favorite Marvel characters, Daredevil is one that when I got into collecting comics in the late 80s, early 90s, I hadn't heard of Daredevil before, and I saw him on the shelf, and actually I think one of the first ones I got was him with Ghost Rider, but I was I don't know who this Daredevil guy is, but he seems really cool, and I just really, really consumed that comic book. That was a big one. Obviously Spider-Man was a big one for me, the X-Men, X-Force, those were all big ones. So Captain America was one that I wasn't always collecting the comics as much, but I always liked him, and I always liked his interplay with the other characters. I always liked him, dealing with whether it was Captain America or, with the Punisher, some of those other ones. I always liked seeing him in other books and making appearances and that kind of thing. So much so that in the mid 2000s, when I first got my MySpace page, I saw there was a blog feature on MySpace, and I was writing my novel 29, the one that I still haven't released yet. But I was writing that one, and I was using the blog feature on MySpace to write free write exercises, little flash fiction pieces. If you want to check those out, they're on I have another blogger called The World Below the Brine. It's based off a Walt Whitman poem, but World Below the Brine. I think it's called The World. It might be. I'm trying to think what the actual site is. I should have probably looked this up ahead of time, but let me just see if I look it up. The World Below the Brine. No, actually, it's mattrpoirier.blogspot.com. That's but the World Below the Brine is what it's called. mattrpoirier.blogspot.com. That's where I kind of have all those free writes. I grabbed them from MySpace, which was a smart move because at a certain point on MySpace, they got rid of them altogether. I am hoping at one point to kind of gather them all, and I've got them all in a Word file. And I'm hoping at one point to just sort of publish them all as Boston stories. But anyway, so there's this main character. He's not named. He's sort of this Boston, confirmed bachelor dandy character with his Norwegian companion, Mads. He's becomes rich, like extremely rich, and sort of goes on these adventures. There's one that happens kind of early on in the process where he meets Gwen, who is a huge Captain America fan. So he sees her in a cafe. She's very pretty, but she kind of doesn't take care of herself that much. And she's got like this big oversized Captain America shirt, and she's like reading a Captain America comic. And so he invites her out to dinner. They go out on a date. They really like each other. She invites him up to his apartment, and he's thinking like, oh, okay, we're gonna hook up, right? That's what's gonna happen here. But instead, she dresses up in this 40s outfit and gives him a script to pretend to be Captain America, and he has to put on like the blue spandex suit. So I remember in late 2000s, I was trying to get 29 sold. I was like, sending it out to agents and stuff. Didn't realize it probably wasn't good enough to be sold. Like now I've like completely overhauled it because it wasn't in any place that it could be to be published or anything like that. And I didn't know that at the time. So I'm reading all these articles that say like these are the things you should do to get an agent to sign on with you. And one of them is get some short stories published. So I took that story of that character with Gwen, and I expanded it out. I called it like the Cappy, the Cappy or the Capper, right? Because he couldn't decide, like how Trekkies or Trekkers, he couldn't decide if she was a Cappy or a Capper. But anyway, I described the date. I sent it off to an online magazine that published short stories. And they sent it back, rejected it, and they said the reason why they rejected it was the guy got the girl too easily, which kind of, I was like, what are they talking about? The guy got the girl too easily? Because in my mind, it's a mutual attraction, right? The main character and Gwen, they see each other and they're mutually attracted to one another. So when he asks her out, of course, she says yes. He doesn't need to win her. He doesn't need to get her, right? They like each other. She wants him to ask her out, and she's excited that he's done it, right? And I didn't really get much into her side of it because it's always about this character, right? And she becomes kind of a bigger character throughout the other ones. But I was kind of put off by it. I was like, what does he mean? What does he mean got the girl? Like, what do these morons think? That you're out there, like, you don't win somebody. There's a mutual attraction. That was at least my understanding of my relationships with significant others, was that I didn't win anybody, right? We were both attracted to each other. That was sort of the understanding. So I get with this short story idea called Chad in Accounting, and it was, essentially what we would now call an incel. Chad was what we would now call an incel. He's this, in the short story, he's at work, in what's essentially the first chapter of what is now Chad in Accounting. He's trying to get with Stacy in accounting, and he's striking out all over the place. And the idea was that he was like had never been with a woman. That was kind of the idea that I originally had for it. And then the story ended up being a little long. It was too long for a short story, and I was like, well, could I turn this into a novel, right? Could I make a second novel potentially? And of course, I'd written 29, so I knew I could write a novel, but it also felt like a daunting task to write a second one, right? Because the first one had taken me years to do. So I had that first chapter, and then I had written another short story previous to that, which ends up becoming the Two Haleys chapter, the third chapter in Chad in Accounting. I had written that short story because just some instances that happened in my life, kind of similar to some of those things. So I'd written it kind of almost from me as the main character, or a fictitious version of me. So I had that floating around. I had this first chapter that ended up being a little long. I went and visited a friend and her boyfriend at the time over that weekend. She lived in the Boston area, and I was telling her about it, and she was like, "Oh, that's interesting. You're thinking of like a, something, you're thinking of trying to do something with it." And she was kind of just fascinated by the idea that you write something and be like, "Oh, it's too long for a short story. So what would you do with it?" We ended up going to visit some friends, and one of the friends tells this story that ends up being the second chapter in Chad in Accounting, Lisa the Heartbroken, where she tells a story about how she got wasted and peed in her purse. Found out in the morning that she'd peed in her purse, and I was like, oh, that's my second chapter. There we go. I've got a new novel that I'm starting here, and that was Chad in Accounting. And I just kind of kept building on it from there, and that's, of course, the novel that you can buy on Amazon. Either Kindle or paperback, as I would say. But Chad in Accounting now has a new cover, of course, right? But Chad in Accounting was born out of the response that I got to a short story about my dandy Boston, millionaire character going on a date with a woman who is a huge Captain America fan. And so, yeah, it's interesting where inspiration comes from and where that is. And it is kind of funny. Her character is kind of a funny one throughout the series because she's very geeky. And the main character, there's a whole My Fair Lady thing where he dresses her up to make her look nice, and then she kind of likes the clothes. And there's a period where he breaks up with her, or she breaks up with him because he's not really used to being in a relationship, and then he realizes he misses her. And then I kind of wrote a second section of short stories where she goes off the grid because she was making her own Captain America TV series, that web series that was being banned by the copyright infringement police, and so she was on the run in West Virginia, kind of making this guerrilla TV series. So kind of a whole thing that was there, but out of that response to a short story and not liking the rejection that I got for that, ends up a whole novel is created. So you never know where the seeds are going to grow for those kinds of things. But I have Captain America to thank for that, at least in some interesting way. All right, so why don't we take a break here, and then when we come back, we will talk about the Avengers. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Don's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. All right, we are back. One thing I want to say before we get into the Avengers, when I was looking up that old The World Below the Brine blog that I had on Blogger, that's again, it's mattrpoirier.blogspot.com. I went into my my account on I kind of looked up, like I clicked on direct-to-video connoisseurs, like the link for the, this post was written by when you're on Blogger. And it was like, oh, website was on the thing. And I was like, oh, I'll click on website, see what that is. It brought me to Matt Movie Guy, which Matt Movie Guy has been grabbed by some really bad actors. It suddenly started flashing fake virus warnings saying that somebody's hacked my phone and is taking it over or whatever. So again, if you ever see those Matt Movie Guy links, do not click on them. That's why we're in the process of trying to get them all removed from the site, because they are bad news, and I don't know where they'll take you, but yeah, it was essentially in the 24 hours or so that it took me to realize I had lost the domain name. Somebody had bought it pretty quickly and started putting spam, like all kinds of viruses and things like that. So again, I just want to remind people, do not click on any of those links ever. And again, that's why we're trying to get them removed as soon as possible. All right, so let's finish up this Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1 look with the Avengers. So I had never seen the Avengers before. It's completely new to me. So one of the things that's interesting is I saw Hawkeye recently. I watched the Hawkeye TV series. Every time I say I saw Hawkeye, there's also the Leo Fong movie, right, called Hawkeye, but I also think of MASH, right, with Hawkeye Pierce. So it is weird that I know I'm talking about the comic book character, because again, Hawkeye as a comic book character was not a big deal growing up, right? As one of the main characters, you didn't really do a lot of Hawkeye. Nobody was really thinking about Hawkeye. But anyway, I watched that series and didn't realize that kind of the opening sequence is Avengers, right? It's the movie. It's this movie and what happens at the end of it. So really interesting thing there. But again, it kind of goes to show too that you don't have to always watch all of these things in order to fully understand them. I understood enough of what happened in Hawkeye without having seen Avengers first, right? Obviously, it makes more sense now, but it made plenty of sense enough for me to enjoy Hawkeye. So, but anyway, so I think the thing about the Avengers, right, when you're talking about what they were doing with this movie here, nobody had really done this before, right? This was kind of the big one. You think of the X-Men, and of course this was mentioned in Wikipedia as well, that the X-Men are their own team, right? They've always been a team, so you kind of always see them as a team, right? It's not like individuals who sort of come together and fight, right? We know the X-Men are a team. They go out and do team stuff, and that's kind of how it is. Whereas with Avengers, it's individual characters and seeing them come together. And again, this was another piece that they had to get right. And I think this one was as important as any of them that they had to get right, because if they get it wrong, with how finicky the film industry is, if they got this wrong, nobody would ever try it again. Right, there would have been no Justice League movie. Obviously, there wouldn't have been sequels to this. There would have been other Avenger movies. People would have been back to just just go back to making the movies the way with the individual characters. Nobody really the Avengers thing is too much or whatever. I don't know, but they needed to get this one right. And they definitely did. I mean, there are some differences between them and the original Avengers. So Ant-Man and Wasp were part of the original Avengers. Instead we get Black Widow and Hawkeye here. So one of the things I didn't know about Hawkeye until I was looking into him, he was originally an Iron Man villain. So that was an interesting piece there. But yeah, so we get Hawkeye as a member of the team. Now, the way that the story works is Loki is the baddie, which Loki was the baddie in the original Avengers storyline. And so the whole reason why they invented the Avengers in the comic books was that they wanted to have a showcase book that would essentially sell the other characters to fans of the book. So if you were a fan of Iron Man, right, you would read the Avengers to see what Iron Man was doing in the Avengers, and maybe pick up a Thor book as well, right? That might entice you to get Thor. It also was a way that they could mix major characters with lesser characters, right? So you could have Ant-Man or you could have Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch or whoever. You could have them with Captain America or Iron Man, and it might sell them, and people would be interested in them that might not have known who they were. This, of course, is taking on a completely different mindset, and part of that is because Kevin Feige, who came up with this idea that we've got characters, the characters that we have the rights to, we could make our own Avengers with them. In his mind, it was different because instead of it being the Avengers is selling the individual ones to everybody, in this case, we were building to an Avengers, right? The Avengers was the crescendo, right? It was the denouement. It was the big finale, the big finish, which is a little bit different from how Avengers was seen in the books. Now, granted, as the Avengers goes on, right, they kind of create different iterations, West Coast Avengers, those kinds of things. Here, it's just sort of just the concept of doing it was such a big enough deal. There were definitely some concerns. One of the things was, Joss Whedon, who makes the film, he wanted to make sure that these individual characters were by themselves and they didn't have their supporting casts with them. Robert Downey Jr. insisted on Gwyneth Paltrow's Pepper Potts being in the film, and I think that's a great addition. But that's why we don't see Don Cheadle, for example, right? Is that they didn't want to have Don Cheadle helping Iron Man. They wanted him to be getting help from Captain America, all the other people in it. Which is interesting because I almost feel like if Don Cheadle is in the film, he might have actually taken Cap's side on a lot of issues over Robert Downey Jr. So it would have been interesting, but anyway, so that's the reason why you don't see him in it, because that was the decision that they made there, was to just make and again you don't see any of Thor's friends aren't in it. That's it's just kind of everybody is sort of individual. They're there. They're put there, of course, by Nick Fury. So just to kind of give you an idea of the story. There's the Tesseract, which we saw in the previous movie, which was what the Red Skull was using to fuel all of his weapons. Henry Stark finds it at the bottom of the ocean. They pick it up. They start making weapons with it because they get a little nervous when they see people like Thor coming to Earth, and they start thinking oh, could there be more Thors coming? Or the especially the Destroyer, right? That really, really scared them. And when they start making weapons with it tips off the universe that the Tesseract is out there, and that's when some baddies employ Loki to get it, open up a big portal so that these baddies called the Chitauri can come and invade Earth and take it over, and it's up to the Avengers to stop them. Now, in the process of creating this portal, Loki is able to take over Hawkeye's brain. So Hawkeye is with the baddies to start with, and then he kind of comes back into the fold. That was something that Jeremy Renner wasn't a fan of. He didn't like that they did that with his character. I will say that was one piece of it when you see the Hawkeye TV series, and he's uncomfortable with the whole Avengers dancing around and all of that kind of stuff on the Broadway show. It's another area where I think he might not be all that much of a fan of it, right? Is that his character was mind controlled for a good portion of that, and it probably doesn't. That's probably a memory that he doesn't really like to have. But anyway. So you've got him. Obviously Hulk is back, and there's a kind of a what's going to happen with his powers. But at least while he's Dr. Banner, he and Robert Downey Jr. can work together on some scientific kind of things. And then you've got the friction between Captain America and Robert Downey Jr. Will they or won't they kind of get it together to be able to fight together? As once Loki attacks like kind of the big jet helicarrier thing that Shield has, they kind of start working together, right? They're a little bit better off. And essentially what happens is all of them kind of come together, and there's this huge invasion that happens on New York City, and New York City is destroyed in the process of this invasion, but the Avengers are able to fight them off and save the day. And it is an interesting thing because I think, again, we're now at this point, this film comes out where it's like it would be the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, and to destroy New York again was something that they would have had to pull off really well. And I think they do pull it off well enough. I mean, again, you don't see a lot of deaths, which I think helps in that sense. But it is something that they must have been cognizant of, right? That they were making the Avengers 10 years, or it was 11 years. Sorry, Captain America was the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. The Avengers came out 11 years, so maybe that was enough, right? Or it wasn't an anniversary year, so people weren't as keen on it. But I think it is. It's only something that stood out to me watching the movie. Now, granted, I also, living in Philadelphia now, I go to New York a lot more. So, to give you a sense, when 9/11 happened in September of 2001, I had never been to New York City before. So I've never seen like the skyline with the Twin Towers. Like my wife grew up here in Philadelphia. That's the skyline that she knew growing up. When they would cross the bridge and go visit her family, like in the Bronx and Brooklyn and places like that. That was what they were seeing with the Twin Towers. And so it was like a huge thing for her. The very first time I saw the New York skyline was going to D.C. for an anthropology convention when I was in like November of 2001. So 2 months later, we came through there. And it was a very different, obviously I didn't have anything to compare it to, right, when I was looking at the skyline, because I didn't have the towers there. But I think it's one of the things about New York City is the bulk of Americans don't ever, if they ever go to New York City, they're going to just go to Times Square. They're going to maybe see a Yankees game. They're going to see a Broadway show. Maybe get some pizza or like a pastrami sandwich at a deli or something like that. But they're not really like doing, they're not going to New York a lot. And for me, that definitely was something that stood out this time. Watching a movie that takes place in New York like that, is that I've been going to New York more often, and there was that sense of like, wow, all those things that I like to do in New York, I wouldn't be able to do, right? They'd all be, because again, nobody really dies. I guess we find out that somebody does die, right? Spoiler for Hawkeye, right? That her dad dies in that sort of the whatever was happening there when the invasion happened. So some people do die, but for the most part, right, it just destroys New York City. But it is, obviously it's a huge finale. It's kind of a big kind of crazy ender to this whole thing, but they play the part of them like all kind of teaming up and getting together really well. I think that was a really nice piece of it. The Hulk piece of it was really good because, again, you don't know what you're going to get with the Hulk. And in the original comics, he's like kicked out of the Avengers because I don't know if he's kicked out or he leaves, but they're not comfortable with him because the Hulk is kind of like that guy, right? That big burly drunk guy who causes trouble that you kind of don't always want to hang out with, right? Because he's causing problems, and you're like, I don't know if I like this guy around. He's just makes me uncomfortable. Which is kind of interesting because now going back to the Ang Lee Hulk, where he kind of created him as the doughy toolbag, it's almost like he was creating what he thought Hulk should be in that sense. And maybe he got it more right than I thought. Like maybe that's really what we should be thinking of Hulk as. But he kind of gets it together and ends up like really like, helping them out and being an integral part of them succeeding in this. But yeah, I think this is that successful, right? It does what you would want this kind of movie to do. You get the friction between the characters. You get to see characters interacting. That, you know, whenever you watch those movies when they were all siloed, right? You wanted this moment that they would all be together, and the fact that this movie did it and did it so well. I will say, the other thing, too, that I think that makes this movie better than the Justice League movie, it just felt like the whole time they were just waiting for Superman to show up and save the day, right? It just seemed like the whole time they were just like, can we get Superman? Can we get Superman? Whereas with this, there's kind of a sense that, like, yeah, once the Hulk shows up, he's going to start, you know, destroying everything. But there was also kind of a sense that, like, the Hulk wasn't the end all. Like, he was a big piece of why they were able to succeed, because he could do so much with his strength. But you still had so many other elements there. And I think the fact, too, that Black Widow plays a huge part in closing the portal, that was a huge element to it. I thought that worked really, really well. Yeah, I mean, I think what you see with this, right, is that the 6-movie arc here, again, I was just trying to think of, like, when you would have seen a comic book series have this kind of an arc that worked this well for this many movies. I mean, when you look at it from the Marvel standpoint, right? You know, if you say like 20th Century Fox, like, let's say if we put all of Fox's movies together as opposed to doing like just X-Men or whatever, right? You know, with Fox, I think if we're nicer to the Daredevil movie from 2003, which I think you can be. I think you can afford to be. Let's say it's decent enough, right? So you've got X-Men, Daredevil, X2, and then you get Elektra in 2005, right? And Elektra is as sauteed and wrong sauce as it gets. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Elektra in a bit here, but I mean, they could have done so many good things with that movie, and they don't. They don't do any of the good things with that. And so it's like, boom, there we are. 4 movies, the 5th one's a dud, right? You know, Columbia Pictures, right? You could kind of do a similar thing there, right? Where the Spider-Man movies, right? Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, really great. Ghost Rider, all right, maybe we say it's good, maybe we don't. You know, we could, yeah, you know, maybe you could make the case for it, but then it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, it's great. It's kind of like the one that doesn't work, right? To have 6 movies, and again, probably the least great ones are like Thor and Incredible Hulk, and they're still really, really solid. You just don't see that. And again, I think from Disney's standpoint, right, when you get into the second phase, I think you kind of have a similar. I haven't seen those ones yet. I've seen, I guess, of the second phase. I'm trying to think which ones I've seen. I've seen that Thor: Dark World. I just happened to catch that one on cable one time. Captain America: Winter Soldier, same thing. Guardians of the Galaxy I watched uniquely on its own, but then I haven't seen Avengers or Ant-Man. Avengers: Age of Ultron or Ant-Man. So and I haven't seen Iron Man 3 yet. So I've seen, I guess, half of those ones. But, you know, I think you watch that, maybe see, like, is it another 6? I mean, I don't know if it is. I don't know if Ant-Man hits that well, but I'll definitely see. But there's definitely a sense, right, that they were going to maybe start the more you keep tacking on the movies, eventually you're going to start getting some misses in there. You're going to get some that don't quite work the way you were hoping they would. But the fact that these 6 are all this solid, it's a sign that they really had something special here. And I was kind of not expecting it to like all of these to the extent that I did. Maybe it's just me getting older, right? Maybe in my early 30s when these came out, or I guess I would have been in my 20s. 20s going to 30s, right? When these ones came out. Maybe I was a little bit more jaded at the time. But yeah, these all really work well. And again, this model of, you know, having individual movies and building into a big team up at the end, it's a model that works really well for 3 phases, right? And when you get to the 3rd phase, I mean, they really extend that out. It's 11 movies, right? As opposed to these other ones where they're like 5 and a finish. To do it, they kind of double it up, right, for the last one. And to still kind of have that momentum. And then I think it's when they get into this multiverse thing, between the fact that the multiverse thing is so all over the place and the fact that they're doing all these TV shows at the same time that they're doing movies, that's when they finally start to lose it a bit. But it is interesting how well they are, you know, that they created the model, they created the paradigm, and even they couldn't stick to it, right? Even they got greedy. I mean, obviously when Disney gets involved, right, they need to maximize every dollar that they can. But I mean, DC should have been following this model, and they should have made it work, and they really didn't. it seems simple enough, but I guess also too, when you look at some of the big swings that they took here, as we kind of look back on the series, right? The first movie, the Iron Man movie, that had to be right and had to work as the first one out of the box, and then like building on it with the second Iron Man movie. So now we've got really this main character that we're building everything around. The Thor movie had to be solid enough. The Hulk movie had to be solid. They couldn't be duds, right? They couldn't afford to be Elektra's or Catwoman's, right? They need to be good enough. Captain America had to be a home run. And they took a major chance with that one and having it set as a period piece in the 40s. That's, they were really trusting that comic book fans would go with them on that. And I think what it did was it brought in a lot of fans who weren't necessarily comic book fans, who suddenly became huge Marvel fans as a result. A huge gamble that worked. And it worked on a level that for me, it's one of my favorite comic book movies. And then the team up, right? The big finale had to work, and again, they hit it out of the park. To kind of come in with these 6 movies and have them all look this way, I thought was a pretty solid deal. Now, if there's one complaint that you could make, or not maybe a complaint, but maybe a criticism, is that it is very white male centric, right? You've got Black Widow is really the only female character. Now, granted, you've got Nick Fury who's kind of running the whole thing. And I didn't realize this, that they had reimagined their characters in the early 2000s, and they reimagined Nick Fury as Samuel L. Jackson. So it was almost like when they wanted someone to play Nick Fury in these movies, they were like, hey, we kind of already based our character off of you. Do you want to play the character? And so he's like, yeah, sure, of course. And he's fantastic, in that role. But like if you go to Disney now and you look up the Marvel page, right? Tom Hiddleston is the only white male there, which is interesting, right? Because he's the villain in this movie, right? And suddenly he's like the celebrated one, of that group, right? That who's left over, who's still making movies from that. I mean, I guess we still get Thor movies as well, but yeah, the fact that it's Tom Hiddleston is interesting. But I think you can also look at some things that were happening with Marvel at that time too, and sort of, I think one of the things with Marvel is that Marvel's characters. There isn't like a Wonder Woman in Marvel's character, right? Captain Marvel is one that we talk about, but Captain Marvel is not Wonder Woman. And, DC is the one that really could get, I think, more of a criticism for not having more female-helmed films because it took them forever to get Wonder Woman off the ground, right? I mean, there's this period of time where it was like in, I guess like in what did they said it was a development hell for a period of time. And so like they're kind of flat, they're doing all right with these Batman movies, but it's like, the fact that they made Catwoman before they ever made a Wonder Woman movie is just astounding, right? So there's that piece there, and then the other thing too is Isaac Perlmutter. He's kind of the Sony email hack that we kind of got some of his under. We got a better sense of who he was as a person, and he talked about Elektra and said that Elektra is just proof that you can't have female led comic book movies, and that may have also made it more difficult to kind of get like potentially like a Black Widow movie made sooner, which I think one of the studios was looking to do a Black Widow movie, and well before the one we ended up getting in 2021, they were looking to do a Black Widow movie. And I think when you look at the second phase, I think at least a Black Widow Hawkeye movie would have probably been really solid there. But yeah, the idea was that Elektra flopped because it was a female-led movie, which that's definitely not the case, right? I mean, I think the reason why Elektra flops is because it's sauteed in wrong sauce. But it kind of shows you, too, how that kind of thing works, that, like, you can't just make Elektra, right? You have to, Elektra has to be really great, or you can never make another female-led comic book movie ever again. And I was trying to think when the next one was after that. Like, so Elektra comes out in 2005, right? And I think that the next one that we get for Marvel, at least, is Captain Marvel, and that is when? That's like 2019, I believe, right? 2019. So right, almost 15 years later, it takes that long to get there. Now, granted, I think I was going to say too that when you talk about like strong female-led movies, for Marvel, a lot of the strongest female characters are mutant characters, right? They're X characters. And I think that's another area why we kind of, it really should have been Fox making those movies, right? I mean, you think Storm, right, would have been a really great standalone movie. They could have done some really great stuff with that. So maybe that's part of it as well. But I also think, too, that, yeah, I mean, outside of the mutant characters and the X characters, right, when they were looking at who they had, that's part of the thing, right? That's part of the issue is that, especially in the 60s, when you were making comic books, they were more male, white male centered characters, and that's part of it. I think kind of more of the thing is that when Isaac Perlmutter is kind of, sidelined, that's when Disney kind of starts to really push more of this, more diversity in the characters. And the truth be told, you get two of the best movies when you do that, right? You get Captain Marvel and you get Black Panther, right? Those are two of the best of all of them. And so, but it is interesting, right, that you think of, when you look at the period when this Marvel, Marvel Phase 1 was, and then you go to the Disney website, right? It's a completely different set of characters that they're selling now, and it doesn't look as white male as it did at this time. And again, there were ways that they were trying to hedge it at that time. So they were trying to do some things, but it is it's definitely for me, I found it to be a little bit striking compared to what we think of as Marvel now. So that's one area of it. Now, the other thing I think that I wanted to get into is that where Marvel was when the first film, Iron Man, came out versus DC, and where they end up when Avengers comes out, right? Because remember when we first started this and we were talking about Iron Man coming out, well, the same year as The Dark Knight, which at that time was like the biggest comic book movie of all time. People were calling it the best comic book movie of all time. DC was firmly in control, right? And if we look at it from the timeline standpoint, right, I mean, that's kind of how it's mostly been, right? DC's in control in the 80s, or late 70s, early 80s with Superman. They're in control in the late 80s, early 90s with Batman. And they've kind of taken over again. There's that brief period where Marvel has taken over a bit, especially with the Spider-Man films, but also, the X films were big enough. And it looked like, DC was primed to kind of take that back over with the Batman ones, with the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. And what happens is that when we get to 2012, right, and you get, Dark Knight Rises, at the same time that you have Avengers kills it, right, just absolutely dominates it. And so we've essentially, in that 5-year period, right, 2008 to 2012, I guess you could say, in that 5-year period, the whole thing is flipped. And Marvel is now the king, and Marvel rules, and DC is the one who's chasing it. And now DC's coming out of this situation saying like, oh, what are we gonna do, right? So the Batman trilogy has ended, and like, oh no, we're gonna do our own, Batman versus Superman. We're gonna finally have the Batman versus Superman movie. We're gonna do our own Justice League, right? They needed it. They needed to do it because they knew where this was going. But the fact was, they'd been standing still for those 5 years, right? It wasn't like they were, pumping out a whole bunch of stuff, right? I mean, they put out a couple like kind of borderline, ones like what was it? The Jonah Hex movie, and then of course they have the Green Lantern movie that wasn't really that good. The interesting thing, of course, right, is that they had to, I guess, kind of reboot Superman, right? They had to do the Man of Steel movie in 2013 before they could even do the Batman versus Superman movie in 2016. So they were a good few years behind on this. And again, if we're looking at that time period, right? So it's 2013 to 2016 is when we finally get Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice. Then a year later, right, we get Wonder Woman and Justice League, right? So they're catching up quickly, but they're catching up. If we look at Marvel in that same period of time, right, you're looking at essentially 2 movies a year for the MCU at this stage, right? Iron Man 3, Thor: Dark World, and then Captain America: Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, which Guardians of the Galaxy is like an unexpected hit. It just really kind of kills it. And then Avengers: Age of Ultron just kind of blows, another big one there. So it's like kind of, it's only a few year period. So it's one of the other things too, is that they're pumping these out quicker now, right? They're starting to kind of get after it sooner. But it's not just DC that's chasing Marvel, right? You remember, we're also dealing with Columbia Pictures and Fox, 20th Century Fox. So Columbia, right? They've rebooted Spider-Man with the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Those are kind of in that period where they're still
they're trying to chase it a bit. And then, of course, 20th Century Fox, they're trying to do the do-over with the Wolverine, starting to keep working with the X-Men movies. And it's not like those things are doing horrible. I mean, there is that sense that the Marvel thing is sort of raising all boats at this time. Everybody's really riding this wave of that. But I think there is also a sense, too. I mean, in the 2010s, you can kind of keep the thing going. And so when we get into the we get that kind of that combination of the pandemic and the oversaturation, that the bottom falls out on it. And now, we're kind of scrambling to try to see if we can make it work again. But I think there was a sense that the Marvel thing, they were king, but they were generating so much buzz that people were watching all kinds of different comic book movies. They were kind of consuming a lot of it. And so I think the only thing is that none of them do it as well as Marvel does it in those first two phases. And I guess, or maybe it's first three phases, I think you can say, yeah, when you wrap up with the Infinity War movies, I think none of them really do it to that degree. It is something that, for me, obviously, direct-to-video connoisseur, I've always been partial to direct-to-video movies and the direct-to-video comic book movies, like the old Punisher and things like that. And I still think there's a place for those kinds of movies. But you can see, too, where, when Disney's buying Marvel and they're really, really building this thing, there's probably no sense that they would ever want to do any kind of thing direct-to-video, that they wouldn't want to do anything that's outside of the kind of the whole picture here. It's a really, really interesting thing that they kind of just kept building it. I think they kind of kept thinking they're going to keep printing money with it, and then of course they started double dipping with the Disney Plus thing. Now they're instead of having everything in the theater, they're doing some things on the TV series to try to sell subscriptions. But going back to that period, it was all so new and so big, and I think it was almost kind of refreshing on how well it all worked. And people were just excited for what the next thing would be, and they just kept riding that wave and kept wanting more of it. And Disney was happy to give it to them, which I guess it makes sense. So anyway, one of the interesting things, I was trying to think of what the best way to describe the Avengers experience was, because it's not like the X-Men, right? The X-Men, they are a team. They're always their own team. So it's not like they're kind of coming together for one purpose. The best description that I could come up with was Laff-a-Lympics. And I don't know if anybody, my age or a little bit older, or maybe even younger, remembers Laff-a-Lympics. The Laff-a-Lympics was like all the Hanna-Barbera characters would come together and compete. So you'd see like Scooby-Doo and Yogi, interacting with each other. That's kind of what the Avengers is, right? I remember the best thing. I remember the first time hearing somebody use Laff-a-Lympics as a description was in the Real World, when the show The Real World, when they did the first reunion. It was New York, LA, San Francisco, and then London, right, was the fourth one. And London kind of came in after, but it was really supposed to be New York, LA, San Francisco that were all meeting together. And Judd from the San Francisco was like, yeah, this is like Laff-a-Lympics, right, where you get to see people from different Hanna-Barbera things interacting with each other. That's really what Avengers is it's like Laff-a-Lympics. And one of the funny things is I was looking up just some stuff about Laff-a-Lympics. As you got curious, I was looking it up, and there was the character Mumbly, who's one of the really rottens, right? And I guess originally Mumbly had his own detective series on a cartoon before that, which I don't really remember that at all. And so I looked him up, and I was trying to see on Wikipedia. I was like looking it up, and they were describing Mumbly, and I was curious about it, and it said they didn't explain why nobody explained why he was retconned from a good detective in the previous series to one of the baddies in this one. I was like, they didn't retcon? They didn't, there was no retcon explanation? It's like, it's Hanna-Barbera, right? Hanna-Barbera doesn't retcon anything because there's no canon. As I was saying on Twitter, the only canon that the people making Hanna-Barbera cartoons knew at that time was the William Conrad show, right? There was no concept of canon. It was one of those things where it was like, oh, we need somebody else for the really rottens. Oh, let's just throw this Mumbly character in. But that's fine, right? It's not like, oh, we've got to retcon it in there. And it's interesting that, I'm comparing Laff-a-Lympics to Avengers, because the Avengers and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the ultimate, like, what's canon, what's not canon, right? There was a falling out between the the movie arm and the TV arm, and that's when the movie arm decided that all of the TV shows, like the what was it? The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like they didn't count as canon. They were suddenly no longer counted. And then it was like, oh, but we'll count the Netflix shows, right? Like so, like Daredevil, because everybody really liked the Vincent D'Onofrio Kingpin that was used in Hawkeye. So it was like, okay, those shows are canon, but the Marvel Entertainment ones, that we're not counting those ones as canon. And it was almost like kind of like a petty thing. But again, it's like, well, why does anything have to be canon or not be canon? One of the problems that I read about with the Avengers as a comic book was that it was difficult to keep track of the two storylines, right? So you'd have Iron Man doing something in Avengers and then doing something in his own book, right? And that became an issue. And so that's when they started pulling the characters out and like kind of having individual characters that really just only were in the Avengers. So like, for example, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, they didn't have their own comic books, right? They just did their own. They were part of the Avengers. So there's that whole that interconnected story part. But the one thing that I always remember is that you would have these sort of one-off series or books. Like Heart of Darkness is one that I really remember. Was a big one. That was like Ghost Rider. I think Ghost Rider, Wolverine, Punisher, and maybe Daredevil as well. I think it was really, really, really great book. And I don't, it was like one of those things where you just kind of pull it off as a one-off. And it's the kind of thing that would be just really amazing if they did that. Now that they have all the rights to all those characters, if they just decided to just make that, I mean, how fantastic would that be? And have it be a one-off, right? It's not something that's building to the main Avengers thing, but it's its own thing. And it doesn't need to be retconned. It doesn't need to be anything. I mean, you don't even need to retcon. I mean, like, what do we? I guess there's this idea that you've got to retcon the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe because it's like, yeah, I mean, right? Why would the X-Men not fight the battle that was going on in New York City, right? If they're so close by, right, in Westchester, New York, they of course, so it's like, oh, you can't just say that the X-Men were there all along, but couldn't you? I mean, but again, it's like with the kids today, like I think that's the problem, is that you have younger people who grew up on this whole canon concept. They would rather this big, elaborate, messy multiverse thing to explain how X-Men were in the Marvel Cinematic Universe than to just have them in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Whereas for I think for people my age and older, if you could just be like, hey, this next movie is going to be Wolverine versus Captain America, and we're not going to explain to you how Wolverine ended up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's just going to be Wolverine. It's going to be Hugh Jackman fighting Chris Evans. I'd be like, yes, sign me up. I'm going to stand in line outside of Man's Chinese Theater for 6 weeks and get my ticket so I can go to the first showing of it. You know what I mean? Like I don't need the retcon. I don't need the whole story thing. And I think that's one of the problems, because that's what's holding back the X-Men being in the greater universe, right? Is that they feel like they have to explain why they're there when it's like, just put them in there. Just do it. Just have them in there. And I mean, that kind of goes back to that Elektra movie that I was talking about. That movie could have been really good. You're watching it again. It's one of those cases of movie being sautéed in wrong sauce, where first off, Typhoid Mary is like one of the best baddies in the kind of the Daredevil, Elektra kind of book series. And instead they have like Natasha Malthek just kind of playing a character named Typhoid who has a completely different set of skills. I mean, if they'd had Typhoid Mary as kind of the main baddie, and then, Echo, I didn't realize Echo came out after I was done watching the series. So Echo was like in the late 90s. But, if they had used Echo with Typhoid Mary and had Elektra fighting them, that would have been amazing. And again, the other thing, too, about Elektra is that Elektra was, a Fox piece, right? So 20th Century Fox did... they had Daredevil, and so that they also had Elektra. They could have had Deadpool because they also had the X ones. They could have Deadpool fighting in that as well because remember he had a thing with Typhoid Mary. So they could have included him. They could have made that one of the most amazing comic book movies ever. And the thing is that now that Marvel has the rights to it, they could go back and do all of that stuff. Like they could do a Daredevil with Ben Affleck, and I don't know if you could do Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner now, right, with the marriage falling apart and all that kind of stuff. But you could go back and do that kind of stuff, and it doesn't have to be connected to this greater Marvel Cinematic Universe. And if the kids have a problem with it, just weather the Twitter storm for a bit, and tell them to go scratch. Like they'll live, they'll get over it. I mean, I've always tell this story about when Mindy Kaling's Velma movie or a TV show was being. The people were bringing that up, or they were talking about that coming out, and the Velma character is gay. And I remember some woman in one of the threads was like, "Well, where is it canonically that Velma is gay?" And it's like, canon for Hanna-Barbera stuff. You need a canon for Hanna-Barbera, and it's like, I think part of it is because us, growing up with Hanna-Barbera stuff, like there was no concept of canon with Hanna-Barbera. They just threw shit against the wall and went for it. I mean, you remember watching Banana Splits. I remember coming back to that one recently. Cartoon Network had it on the late 2000s. And I mean, it's just like these guys in suits that would go out to, like, I remember one time they were going to like a Confederate parade in the South. And it's like people are dancing around with Confederate flags and Confederate army gear on, and these guys in suits, these animal suits, are dancing around with them, and I'm like, what the hell is this? But it's Hanna-Barbera, right? Like, they just didn't care. Of course, I wasn't going to get into it with them. It's much easier just to use it as material for my podcast and stuff like that. But I mean, yeah, there is no canonically when it comes to Hanna-Barbera. Scooby-Doo doesn't have a canon. It's Scooby-Doo is whatever Hanna-Barbera wanted Scooby-Doo to be for that time. And if it's like, if Batman's going to show up and help solve mysteries, that's perfectly fine. And if if Scooby's got another dog named Scrappy or some other dog that hangs out with him and they all want to get Scooby snacks and get chased around, that's fine too. And I think we're so hung up on everything needing to have a canon that all fits. It's Vin Diesel does it, right, where he's just like, Jason Statham actually killed this guy in the third movie. It just keeps like layering on like things that happened in the past, and more things happen in the past and stuff like that. It's like, I guess it's fine when it's Vin Diesel and it's just his own thing. He's just making it, but not everything needs to fit, right? Not everything needs to go together. It can just be like movies and TV shows and all that stuff. They can just be, and we can just have them. It just was kind of a joke after the fact that the Happy Days, that the family had an older brother and he disappears after the first season, right? Is it Chuck? I think is his name, right? Like, we just kind of joke about that, but it's not like people are like, oh my God, what happened to him canonically? How did was it that he was did he disappear? Did it's to turn out that maybe he upset the family and they cast him out? Like, what? Nobody cared. Nobody cared. It was a joke, right? It was just a joke that this brother disappeared, or I mean, I don't know how many times they'd add a new kid, right? And the kid would suddenly be 10, right? And it would be like one season like it was a baby, the next season it was going to kindergarten, right? We didn't ask, we didn't care. It was part of the fun, and I think this whole need for things to all fit, I think it worked really well in these first 6 movies to have everything fit, but also the fact that there were only like little pieces of these movies that were part of this final end movie. There's so many things that happen in, for example, in the 2 Iron Man movies that aren't part of this last movie. That it can be that they're their own movies and they all work as their own thing. But I think there's this other element of it that I kind of forget as being older, that for younger millennials and older Gen Z who were born in the mid to late 90s, right, who, one, they don't remember 9/11. So when they see New York getting destroyed, there isn't a sense of 9/11, evoking any of that imagery in there, which is a little bit different. But the other piece is that they are used to these interconnected stories, and they're used to this idea of canon. And everything's got to fit that. That there's a sense of like, when you do your fan fiction meets the canon, right? Or it fits within there. And that's like kind of the highest praise you can give somebody's fan fiction, right? Is that it feels like canon to you. And I think it's great because it makes people very invested and they're excited about it and they want to see more of it happen. But I think it also hamstrings the writers. Because, I mean, again, they've got this huge property in the X characters, and they can't do anything with them because they've got to somehow use some multiversal thing to add them into this Marvel Cinematic Universe when we should have already had, Heart of Darkness movie with Ghost Rider and Wolverine and Daredevil and Punisher. We should have already had that movie, right? We should already have Wolverine fighting Captain America, or teaming up with Captain America. We should already have this stuff, right? It should have already happened, a couple years ago when Disney first bought out. And not only should we have had those, but we should have had like Predator versus Captain America. Where's our Predator versus Captain America, right? Like why haven't we had that yet? Why haven't we had like, a Star Wars and Guardians of the Galaxy crossover, right? All that stuff, we've needed it. We've needed it so bad. And again, because of canon, right? Because nobody was able to retcon why Mumbly went from being a good detective in his own cartoon to being one of the really rottens in the Laff-a-Lympics. Because Hanna-Barbera didn't do that extra legwork. We're stuck now waiting for whatever. So I feel like I'm ending on a downer here, and I really shouldn't be, because Avengers is that good of a movie, and it does what you want it to do, and so I think the fact that the whole thing has kind of gotten out of hand, it shouldn't. I guess you could maybe blame Avengers for it, because it's almost like it starts the seeds and it gets it going there. But if you go back and watch it and kind of forget about where we're at now with all that kind of stuff. Seeing it as kind of a groundbreaking comic book movie that does something that, again, hadn't been done since Laff-a-Lympics, right? I mean that's really where they were going with it, was Laff-a-Lympics or the Real World Reunion. Like we hadn't seen anything since those kinds of those pieces. This is that good, and it really works, and I think. It's worth checking out. I think, going through and watching these 6 movies again, like I have, and in some cases for the first time, like with Avengers, it was a really fun experience. And I think that's part of the reason why I want to keep this going. I want to kind of look at some of the other Marvel movies, because this did definitely, at least going into Phase 2 and seeing what Phase 2 is like. And maybe if I do Phase 3, that's still, it's like the same amount of movies as the Fast and Furious, right? It's 11 movies. That's how long, right? Fast and Furious was 11 movies if you add in Hobbs and Shaw. So actually, it's not like it's any longer than any of the, than doing the Fast and Furious one. So maybe I could do Phase 3 as well. But, we'll see. We'll see. But, this was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. And so I'm kind of looking forward to kind of maybe in some iteration, maybe, whether it's like a Thursday shorter pod or something like that. I say shorter pod. I mean, I've gone 45 minutes talking about this Avengers thing here. So, so anyway, I might as well wrap it up here. So, as we're wrapping up, again, my novels, Don's House in the Mountains is the newest one. But again, as I've talked about on this episode, Chad and Accounting is there, and a really great one if you want to start out with my novels. I think it's one of my favorites that I've written. I think you'd really enjoy it. It's available in paperback, and Kindle has a new cover. So I think that was a concern people had when I first put out Chad and Accounting. I had no image for the cover. It was just the title and my name on it, which I liked it. I liked that look. It was like a black cover with just white writing, my name, white writing for the title. But I've added a cover image design I created on Canva, which I think looks really cool. So you're definitely welcome to check that out. The link to my authors page is in the description for this here. And then, of course, the website, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com. That's where you can find everything else. And I think that's pretty much everything. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk again soon. Bye, everyone.